Some killers never needed knives, or guns, or rope. Some didn't chase, didn't hide, didn't wait in bushes or leave claw marks on doors. They didn't even look like killers, not to neighbors, not to cameras, not even to the people who opened their doors and let them in. These killers were never profiled because the patterns never fully formed. Never sensational enough to catch national attention. Too slow, too local, too soft. But they existed, not just in the margins, but in the spaces between what people think evil looks like and what it actually is. This is not about monsters. It's about men. And the first was one of the quietest. Between 2001 and 2008, 7 elderly residents died across 4 counties in northern Florida, all from apparent natural causes. Their deaths were not connected. Each one was over the age of 75. Each one had a history of declining health. None had family living nearby. None had any sign of robbery or assault. But years later, when a lawsuit forced the digitization of death certificate data for statewide care audits, a volunteer analyst noticed a detail no one else had: a box that had been checked for each of the 7. Blood drawn in final 48 hours. Why? That box was rarely marked. Fewer than 3% of natural deaths involved blood draws in-home, especially not for those who declined hospital transport. But for these 7, the records showed in-home nurse visits within 2 days of death. The name listed on the logs: Henry Varnes. He wasn't a nurse, not certified, not licensed. But in small towns like Perry or Monticello, no one asked for papers when a clean-cut man in his 50s showed up wearing scrubs, holding a clipboard, and telling the receptionist he was here for scheduled draw. He was polite, soft-spoken, signed fake names, used real billing codes, and always left within 20 minutes. No one remembered him until the logs were compared. His name was used 7 times, his handwriting never matched, his signatures never repeated, but the procedure code always did. 36415, venipuncture, standard. It wasn't until 2011 that an ex-caretaker reported something strange. Her elderly client had passed away peacefully in his recliner, but after the body was removed, she noticed something on his upper arm, a small puncture sealed with invisible tape. There was no mention of a draw in his chart. The coroner ruled it natural causes. But when she mentioned it years later to a nurse who had worked at a nearby hospice, the nurse remembered the same detail on another patient, and another. They began asking around, and that's when they found out none of those patients had signed off on lab work. None had physicians authorizing labs that month, and 2 of the 7 hadn't had primary care physicians at all. Yet vials were drawn. Blood was taken. One neighbor remembered seeing a van with no markings parked outside one home, engine running, man in scrubs walking out holding a small white cooler, but she thought he was from hospice. Another remembered seeing a man knock, be let in, then leave 15 minutes later, wiping something from his arm as he stepped back into the car. That patient died the next morning. The body was cremated. No autopsy. It had been a hot summer. Her death was expected, and there was nothing to suggest it wasn't, until the paperwork showed she'd had no medications for over a week and no reason for a venipuncture. No hospital ever received her labs. No cooler was ever logged as delivered. No mobile phlebotomist by the name Henry Varnes had ever been certified in the state of Florida. But the billing codes were real. He knew them, used them, submitted them, and when one county attempted to trace where the Medicare paperwork had been filed from, the address led to an abandoned building outside Tallahassee, with a single blue mailbox bolted to the wall, empty. No forwarding address, no fingerprint match. Just a folder of blank CMS forms left inside a filing cabinet, half burned, half mildewed. 7 people, 7 visits, 7 unexplained draws. The blood was never logged, never sent to any lab. It was taken, kept, disposed of, or not. One nurse called him a collector, not of death, of essence, of pieces of people who were almost gone already. The theory was simple. He watched obituaries, identified those on hospice or living alone, showed up as a nurse, took what he came for, then left. The death was already near. He didn't cause it. He didn't rush it. He just waited for the moment the body had no defense left, when it would be easy, undetectable, acceptable. His last appearance was in 2008, or so it was believed. But one local funeral home director, after hearing about the case, quietly submitted a tip. In 2019, she remembered a man who showed up to prearrange cremation for his aunt, who wasn't dead yet, paid in cash, asked specific questions about how long blood remained viable post-mortem, said he had permission to retrieve medical waste after cremation. She declined the request. But when the woman did pass 2 weeks later, a man in scrubs was seen entering the home just before hospice arrived. She was pronounced dead within the hour. There was no cooler, but the old woman's forearm had a bandage on it, and no one could explain why. The next killer didn't take blood. He didn't take anything. He gave something instead, a box, a gift. A welcome back present for people who had only just escaped, people who'd been missing, presumed dead, and then found again. People who thought they were safe, until the box arrived. The woman in Apalachicola was the first to be buried with questions still in the air. Her son had flown in from Michigan for the funeral and noticed something off when he arrived at the home to help clear her belongings. There were no signs of distress. The bed was made, the thermostat was set low, the oxygen tank was untouched. But on the kitchen counter was a note she'd written to herself earlier that week. Don't forget, no needles, no strangers. She had written it after a bad dream, her caregiver said. She'd insisted on it being left there, a reminder. So when the coroner's report mentioned a small puncture on the inside of her elbow, her son became concerned. There was no recent hospital visit, no prescription changes, and yet the mark was there, sealed, clean. He called the hospice nurse, who said she'd never authorized a blood draw. She said no one from their agency had visited that morning. The time of death was listed as early morning, but no one had been there to witness it. The door had been locked. When they pulled visitor logs from nearby homes, one neighbor recalled a man in blue scrubs parking around 6:45 a.m., standing by the door as if waiting. She thought he was early for a shift change. Another neighbor saw him too. Not entering, just standing outside with something wrapped in a towel. A box, maybe. She said he walked to the back gate, paused, then walked away. No one could describe his face, only that he looked hollowed out, thin, not sick, not tired, just drained. That same word was used by the ME reviewing the tissue reports. The body showed signs of complete circulatory slowdown, pre-death hypovolemia. But the woman wasn't anemic. Her iron was fine. She hadn't suffered trauma, and her medical record showed no ongoing blood conditions. But the strange thing, what stuck out, was the way her veins had collapsed. Not like someone in cardiac arrest, not like someone old and fading, but like someone who'd lost too much fluid too quickly, like someone had taken too much. Just enough to make the body shut down, but cleanly, silently, without alarm. And then they found the same collapse in another patient, then another, all within the same 2-year window, all in homes with locked doors. No signs of entry, no logged medical visits. Just a man in scrubs who was never captured on camera, who never left a trace, except for the puncture and the clean cooler with no label. In 2008, a report surfaced from an EMT in Wakulla County. He'd arrived at a call for a hospice patient who had gone unresponsive. When he got there, the family said the nurse had already been and gone, but hospice had no record of any staff being assigned that morning. The EMT didn't think much of it. The patient was elderly, expected to pass. But as he checked her vitals, he noticed a bandage on her neck. Not recent, not raw, but sealed. Like a draw had been taken from the jugular. The family assumed it was part of care, but no one could confirm it. The bandage had been pressed down with careful tape, like a practiced hand. The only clue was in the wastebasket, a plastic film with trace amounts of latex powder like a glove wrapper, and a twist tie. No glove, no syringe, no prints, just absence. Like the killer had never come and yet left the scene quieter than it had been before. In 2011, one investigator tried to follow the billing trail again. This time, it led to a different address. An unlisted hospice shell company dissolved in 2009. When she called the number, it rang to a voicemail with no message. She never received a call back. Months later, she requested the old mail records for the P.O. box listed. One envelope stood out. It had no return address, postmarked from Georgia. Inside, a single patient discharge, form dated July 2008. The name of the patient matched one of the deaths from the early list. The field labeled outcome had been typed in all caps, cleared. The final column, drawn for, was blank, just an underscore. But below the line, typed in smaller font, it said, confirmation, 3:17 a.m. That time appeared in 4 other files later reviewed by the task force. Always the same minute, never listed as time of death, but always placed near the final draw, like a schedule, like a signature. And then it stopped. No new cases, no unexplained collapses, the cooler never seen again. But one county clerk did report something odd in 2020. A man called to request an official form to pre-register blood collection before expiration. She said he sounded polite, careful, knew the terms, knew the code, said he was preparing a personal archive. When she asked his name, he hung up. The call came from an untraceable VoIP line, but the time of the call, 3:17 a.m. The next killer didn't call. He didn't check in. He didn't wait for death. He waited for return. He waited for the moment someone who had been found, someone who had once disappeared, came back to the world. And that's when he sent the box. Just once. No message. Just an object, wrapped tight, with no return label. And every time someone opened that box, they vanished again. For good this time. He only came for those who'd come back. Survivors. Escapees. People found wandering on highways after being missing for years. Children grown into adults with no memory of what happened. Men pulled from basements. Women pulled from rivers. They were rare, and they were always fragile. But they were alive, at least until the box arrived. It never came quickly, sometimes years after, sometimes only months. But when it did, it always came the same way, standard brown cardboard. No tape on the outside, folded perfectly. A single name printed in black marker. Just the first name, no last, no return address, no postage. Just delivered, quietly, set down on the doorstep, sometimes in a mailbox, sometimes on a windowsill, and inside always the same thing, an object the survivor had once been found with, but altered. One girl, found at age 9 after being missing for almost 2 years, received a box containing a copy of the same pink stuffed bear she'd been holding when she was rescued. But this time, the bear had no face. Just smooth, pale fabric where the eyes and mouth had once been stitched. Her mother threw it away. 2 days later, the girl was gone. Her bedroom window locked from the inside, her shoes still by the bed, a plate of food uneaten. No one saw her leave. But in the backyard, buried shallow beneath the soil near the tree she used to climb, was the bear. Clean, untorn, but now with a stitched smile where there had been none before. It had her name sewn into the back, the same way it had when she was found. Except this time, the thread was red, and no one in the family had sewn it. The second case came in 1998. A man named Russell Rhee had been found in a remote hunting cabin after being declared missing for 4 years. He had no memory of how he got there. He'd been kept, it seemed, federal, but his wrists bore old ligature scars. He spoke softly but clearly. He said he remembered a bell. That was all. He rebuilt his life slowly, moved into a small apartment outside Little Rock, took a job at a hardware store. 3 months later, the box arrived, left on his doorstep. Inside, a brass bell, identical to the one sold at the shop where he now worked. Except this one had no clapper inside, no sound, no ring, just hollow. Russell returned to work the next morning, spoke to no one, left on his lunch break, never came back. His apartment was untouched, the box was gone, but the bell was found in his work locker, with a single black thread tied through its handle, pulled tight and knotted like a wrist loop. DNA from the knot matched Russell, but there were no prints on the bell, not even his. More cases followed. Always the same pattern. Someone who had once vanished, a cold case cracked, a survivor returned, began to feel normal again, sometimes after years. And then the box came. Inside, an altered version of what had been found with them. A necklace, but the chain tied in a knot too tight to undo. A shirt, but sewn shut at the arms. A photo, reprinted, but with their face gone, blurred like fogged glass. One boy who had been pulled from a mine shaft at age 10 received a metal toy car in the mail at 19. It looked exactly like the one he'd been clutching when found. But the wheels had been filled with wax, sealed, weighted. He threw it away. A week later, he vanished during a gas station shift. Security cameras glitched during the 10-minute window. He was alone. The trash bin behind the building was emptied 2 days later. Inside, the toy car, wiped clean. Police dismissed the boxes as psychological trauma triggers, artifacts, flashbacks. But every recipient who disappeared had been seen by someone in the 72 hours after receiving the object. And in each case, someone reported the same thing, that the survivors seemed distant, distracted, like they were hearing something, sometimes a humming, sometimes a ticking, but always internal. One therapist who worked with a returned survivor in 2001 said her client began to report dreams of a door opening the wrong way, not outward, inward, as if the space behind it was pulling instead of releasing. When asked what was on the other side, she only said, "The box." Not a box. The box. She received one 2 months later, a knitted scarf just like the one she'd worn when found wandering barefoot in Missouri at age 11. Except this scarf had been unraveled and rewoven into a noose. She hung herself 2 days later. No suicide note. Just the box, closed, sitting beside her feet. Inside, the scarf again, still tied, still warm. The next killer didn't send boxes. He didn't leave anything behind. He only knocked. Once. And when the door opened, the only thing left was the smell and the stain. Always in the hallway, always near the vent, always in homes that shared the same blueprint, homes that had no history of violence, until the knock. The media never called them linked. There was no arrest, no suspect sketch. No one ever saw the person who delivered the boxes, not even camera footage, which either glitched or failed to capture the exact moment the object arrived. In a few cases, the recipient even denied it existed, said nothing arrived, said they hadn't opened anything, but the box was always found. Later, in their car, on their bed, sometimes in a place only they could have put it. One girl who had been recovered in 2005 after vanishing at a rest stop at age 12 lived with her aunt in Arkansas under a new name. She stayed quiet, refused interviews, got a part-time job at a flower shop, tried to disappear into normal. Her aunt said she was getting better, learning to laugh again. Then, in early spring, a customer left a package at the shop addressed only with the word sunflower. That had been the nickname the press used for her, based on a doodle she'd drawn on the side of her missing persons flyer. No one else knew. Her aunt burned the package without opening it. But that night, the girl screamed in her sleep for the first time in 2 years. Repeated the word no over and over, not like refusal, but like a countdown. The next morning, she was gone. Her shoes were still wet from the dew. Her room untouched. But when the aunt walked into the flower shop to close it early, the entire back wall cooler, where they kept fresh-cut stems, was filled with only one flower. Sunflowers, 17 of them, all trimmed, all perfectly arranged. No receipt, no delivery. The walk-in freezer had been unlocked. The door hadn't been forced. In the middle of the concrete floor was a small square of cardboard, damp, flattened, like a box had been there. But the box itself was gone. Theories began to circulate quietly between law enforcement officers who had worked multiple counties. A few even met unofficially, comparing the details, the box shape, the condition of the items, the behavior of the victims, just before disappearing again. But the problem was this: the second vanishing always made less sense than the first. The first could be blamed on abduction, on trauma, on logistics, but the second had no trails. The second looked like surrender, not struggle. Doors left open, beds made, pets fed, fridges full, as if the person had planned to leave quietly, as if the person knew they weren't coming back and didn't want to make it worse. And in a few chilling instances, notes were found, not written in the victim's handwriting, but typed or printed, single line, always folded and left face down. The messages were never threats. They were acknowledgments. Thank you for keeping it safe. You did your part. It's time to finish what was opened. One detective from Boone County said he believed the killer didn't view himself as a killer at all. He thinks he's restoring something, that he's closing a loop. He doesn't take people who've disappeared. He takes people who never should have come back. And that's why the boxes weren't weapons or messages. They were keys, not to unlock something, but to reseal it, to return the person to wherever they'd come from. What happened to them after? No one knows. No bodies were ever recovered, no sightings, no calls, just empty homes, sealed silence, and an untraceable box that always arrived too late to stop. By 2008, the cases tapered off. No new recoveries were followed by vanishing. But then again, fewer missing people were being found at all. It's like the killer's job had already been done. Or maybe he stopped watching. Or maybe, as one ex-agent theorized, he'd finally returned himself. The next killer didn't return anything. He didn't leave objects or touch the body. or even stay in the room long enough to feel like a presence. He just knocked. Once. And that was enough. Because the moment the knock was heard, something else had already entered. Through the vents, through the crawl spaces, through the blueprints that had never been officially approved. The hallways weren't just narrow. They were designed for echo. And he had been listening, all along. He didn't force his way in. He didn't pick locks. He didn't smash windows. He didn't need to. He entered with sound, with the timing of footfalls that matched your own, with the vent pressure that changed just slightly when the heat came on. Not from the furnace, but from a space beneath the ductwork that wasn't listed on the plans. In 3 different housing developments across Illinois, all built by the same defunct regional contractor in the mid-90s. A series of unexplained deaths and vanishings occurred over a 7-year period. They were never linked, not officially, not publicly. But the hallway dimensions were always wrong. The floor plans submitted to the zoning boards measured the interior hallway at 41 inches across. But during cleanup or renovation after the deaths, inspectors kept noting something strange. The baseboards had been pushed in, reinstalled or extended, as if the hallway had once been wider. And in the space that remained, the gap between what should be and what was now, something had moved. The first incident was in a rental unit outside Springfield. A single mother and her 6-year-old son. The boy started telling his teacher about the copycat man in his house, someone who walked when they walked, stopped when they stopped, not footsteps. Thump sounds, he said, like walking through a sock. The mother laughed it off, until she heard it too, always at night. Always in the hallway. Her smoke alarm went off 3 nights in a row, even though there was no smoke. When she asked the landlord about it, he shrugged, said the hallways always messed with the wiring. On the 4th night, she called 911, whispered that someone was standing outside her bedroom door. The dispatchers stayed on the line, then lost her. Police arrived to find her son asleep in bed. Her body was found in the hallway. No marks, no injuries, just collapsed mid-step. Her slippers were placed perfectly together behind her heels, like she had stepped out of them. The smoke alarm had melted, not from heat, from moisture. The condensation on the hallway ceiling dripped for 3 days after. The second victim was a man in his 20s renting an apartment in a matching blueprint in Bloomington. He worked nights, lived alone. His upstairs neighbor reported strange noises, pacing, furniture moving, faint humming. But the man was rarely home. When questioned, he said he sometimes heard someone in the walls. Not mice, he said, larger, like elbows. The building manager opened the utility access behind the hallway panel and found something strange. Someone had drawn a rough map of the unit in pencil on the inside drywall. A single word written in one corner. Still. It was assumed to be from a previous tenant, until the tenant stopped answering calls. No one found him for 5 days. His body wasn't in the unit. The bed was made. The TV was on. The hallway light was shattered, not burned out, but crushed, like something had punched it from below. Maintenance entered to inspect the damage. When they cut back the baseboard to patch wiring, they found an opening. 6 inches wide, 6 feet long, just air. Not crawl space, not vent, not duct, a void, empty, cold, lined with insulation so old it flaked off like snow. The cavity led nowhere, ended in a hard right angle. The walls weren't scratched, but one had finger-shaped dents, perfect spacing, as if someone had rested their hand there for a very, very long time. The next day, they found the tenant, folded between the floor joists, tucked into a space no wider than his shoulders. His body wasn't broken, just still. His lungs had collapsed, not from compression, from fear. The coroner said it looked like someone who had held their breath until their bodies stopped trying to remember how to breathe. The opening was sealed, but more deaths followed, in units with the same hallway layout, with the same vent sound, the same condensation, the same late-night knock that always came when no one else was awake, and always, just before the knock came the breath. A long, slow exhale from a space that shouldn't have had lungs in it at all. The next killer didn't come from the walls. He came from under them, through holes no one dug, into places where children slept. He didn't knock. He whispered, and if they whispered back, he knew their name. And that meant he could crawl in. The units were almost always rented to single occupants, young professionals, recently divorced, retirees, the sort of tenants who didn't ask questions about blueprints, who never saw what the wall looked like before it was painted, who didn't know how to measure the silence until it began pushing back. In 2002, a woman named Deanna Letts moved into one of the identical structures in Peoria, the fourth confirmed unit built using the same contractor plans. She was a legal transcriptionist who worked from home, quiet, routine, and she began noticing something wrong with her hallway mirrors. Each morning they were slightly off, not crooked, not turned, just repositioned, tilted a degree higher, a little closer to the floor. At first she thought she was bumping them, but the angle changed too subtly, so she mounted one to the drywall with reinforced bolts. After 3 days, the bolt holes were stretched. The mirror was loose again, and the sound began, not in the walls, but in the door frame. A low tapping, like someone knocking gently with their knuckle over and over from inside the frame itself. She recorded it. When she played the sound for her brother, he thought it was static. She insisted it wasn't. One night, she left a notepad on the hallway floor with a pen. She wrote a single word. "What?" In the morning, the pad was blank, but the pen had been opened, clicked. And on the back of the notepad, pressed so faintly she only saw it in the right light, were indentations. Not writing, just lines. Parallel, spaced 1 inch apart. Like someone had laid their fingers flat on the page, pressed down, then dragged them off the edge. She moved out that week, left the furniture behind. When the landlord arrived, the unit was cold, below ambient temp despite the heater being on. And the hallway smelled like soil, fresh, wet, like something had been dug and filled again. That same year, the building's new owner tried to renovate. He brought in contractors to update the HVAC system. When they pulled down the ceiling panel near the hallway vent, a pocket of air released, like suction. Inside, they found 3 items sealed in foil insulation: a torn piece of fabric, a glass eye, and a child's sock. None matched any current or former tenant. But when cross-referenced with police archives, the sock was a match for a missing child from the 90s, taken from a neighborhood 3 towns away. The building hadn't existed back then, and yet the sock had been stored with care, sealed against time, as if someone had taken it not as a trophy, but as a reminder. The vent system was overhauled, the baseboards rebuilt, but a month later, a new tenant reported hearing breathing that wasn't mine. She left the voicemail at 2:46 a.m. That voicemail cut out at 2:47. When police entered the unit, they found the hallway door frame twisted slightly. Not broken, just widened, like something had moved through it slowly, patiently. The bulb above it had burst inward, shards on the floor. And the smoke alarm was gone, removed clean. No one ever found it. But the maintenance man who replaced it found something else inside the ceiling, a strip of carpet padding rolled tight. Inside it, curled neatly like an offering, was a strip of paper, blank except for a single handprint pressed in dust. When dusted for prints, no whorls were found, just texture. Like the palm had no pattern, no identity, just pressure, just the act of waiting. And that's what investigators began to suspect, that the killer didn't act in bursts. He didn't strike. He waited hours, days, weeks, for movement, for pattern, for the moment the occupant walked through the hallway just once, too slowly, or looked too long into the dark edge of the vent, or whispered, "Who's there?" a little too clearly. That's all he needed. Recognition, a name to hold. And once he had it, the walls were never thick enough. Not to stop the breath, not to block the knock, not to prevent the crawl from resuming. The building was condemned in 2004, bulldozed a year later. But during the demo, one worker said they found a narrow hollow space between units 2B and 3A, no more than 6 inches wide, running the length of the wall. At the end of it, pressed upright like it had always been there, was a kitchen chair, facing the wall, bolted to the floor. The next killer didn't sit, he didn't crawl, he didn't knock, he sang, but only once. Just a single note, never longer than 6 seconds, delivered at frequencies low enough to vibrate glass. He never needed to be in the room. Once you heard the note, the countdown began. And when the sound stopped, so did your heart. He didn't follow you, didn't touch you, didn't watch through windows. He didn't need to. He let you come to him. You didn't know when you heard it. You didn't even know what you heard. But something changed after. In the silence. In the stillness. After the 6 seconds ended, something was gone. And a clock had started. It wasn't a song, not really, not with melody or lyrics, but they called it that anyway. The 6-second song. It first surfaced in Nevada in the summer of 2009, when 3 hikers in Red Rock Canyon were found collapsed on a trail with no signs of dehydration, no drugs, no trauma. One survived. She told rangers they had stopped briefly to take photos. She remembered standing still and then hearing a note, not from the wind, not from wildlife, but from inside her own chest. She said it buzzed in her bones, lasted just long enough for her to notice it. Then it vanished. When she turned around, the other 2 hikers were lying on the ground, eyes open. Both pronounced dead at the scene. Their bodies had no physical signs of collapse. Their lungs had frozen. Not from cold, but from sudden stasis. The rangers said their pupils were dilated unevenly, that their fingertips had turned pale too quickly. The coroner didn't know what to write. Eventually, cardiac failure due to suspected electrical disruption. But no lightning, no trauma, no explanation. The survivor was monitored for 72 hours in case of heart damage. Nothing came back. But the nurse recorded one strange detail during vitals. Her pulse held steady except at one exact moment on the second night, 3:44 a.m., when her heart stopped for 6 seconds, then restarted. No alarm, no pain, just silence on the monitor. When it resumed, she said she didn't remember falling asleep. She just remembered a note, and then waking up to an empty room. In 2011, 2 deaths in separate counties occurred within 24 hours. Both in hotel rooms, both with radios unplugged, but headphones still resting beside the bodies. The coroner ruled both as seizures. But the sound engineer hired for a civil suit found something else. The radios were off, but the headphone jacks had heat residue, as if voltage had passed through them recently. He analyzed the cable ends. One had a melted plastic ring, barely visible without magnification. He reconnected the system and tried to track signal traces, and he found one, 6 seconds, buried in the static, not vocal, not music, but a tone. 3 frequencies layered, one low, one at heart rhythm, one at something else, infrasound. He ran it through pitch software, the wave mapped like a ripple in metal. He sent it to a contact at a military acoustics lab. The response came back one line: "Don't run this through headphones." He didn't, but the families of the deceased reported something disturbing. Both victims had complained of a sound in the days before their deaths, a hum, low, like an old fridge. Both had been listening to meditation tracks. Both had downloaded from the same server, a third-party site that had no hosting record past August 2011. The IP was traced to a rental P.O. box in Henderson. When the lab tech drove out to the listed address, the building had been burned. Fire ruled accidental, but on one half-charred piece of drywall left inside, someone had carved something beneath the soot. 6 short vertical lines, evenly spaced, like a measure in sheet music, but with no notes, just space, just rhythm. The file was passed through local jurisdictions for years. The working theory: someone was embedding infrasonic frequencies into digital files, oral sabotage, audio terrorism, but no threat ever followed, no demands, just silence. Then a body. Always the same, M.O., unexplained collapse, often while alone, sometimes while on a call, always with an audio device nearby, a Bluetooth speaker, a smart TV, an old cassette player. In 2014, a teenage girl collapsed in her driveway while rehearsing for a choir audition. The song she was practicing? A spiritual, one she'd never sung before. Her father found her with the earbuds still in. When the recording was played back later by police, it sounded normal, until second 44. Then something else entered the waveform, a tone, barely audible. But the device itself, a cheap MP3 player, had a damaged battery chip. When engineers removed it, they found a second chip behind the first, not part of the manufacturer's design. It had been soldered in aftermarket, purposefully, deliberately. The device had been bought at a second-hand shop the week prior. The clerk remembered the customer who sold it. Tall man, no facial hair, wore gloves despite the heat. Paid in cash, never looked up. The 6-second song wasn't a myth. It was a method, not a melody but a blueprint, an oral key that opened something in the body. Not the brain, but the rhythm. And once opened, something inside simply let go. And the next killer didn't let go. He didn't need songs, or air, or breath. Just the heat of a locked car. The kind left in sun-soaked parking lots, where toddlers sleep in the back seat, where tired mothers step out for 1 minute too long. But this man didn't stumble upon cars. He looked for them. Waited for them. And every time when the parent returned, the seat was empty. The door was locked. But there was no body, no child, only fog on the window, shaped like 2 hands pressed outward, too small to reach the latch, too late to scream. It wasn't negligence. It wasn't forgetfulness. It wasn't tragedy. That's what they kept saying on the news, that these were heat stroke deaths, that parents just forgot. But the patterns didn't match. The math didn't work. Not when the doors were locked from the inside. Not when the windows were closed, but no one ever remembered closing them. Not when the car alarms were never triggered. Not when, more than once, a parent returned to find the buckle unlatched, the car seat empty, but no child, no sound, no trace. Just the print. One perfect palm pressed into the fogged glass. In 2005, a woman in Mesa left her 3-year-old son in the car for 2 minutes while running back into the house for her phone. The car was parked in the shade, the keys still in the ignition, AC running. When she came out, the car was off. The driver door was unlocked, but the rest were still latched. The back seat was empty. She screamed. Police arrived. No sign of forced entry, no footprints, nothing. It was summer. Everyone blamed the heat. But the mother insisted. The boy couldn't open the buckle. He couldn't reach the door. He couldn't disappear like that. She was charged with neglect. Years later, the same car seat model, same brand, same style, showed up in a different case, this time in Tucson. A father left his daughter for 6 minutes while checking into a hotel, car parked beneath a camera. The video showed no one approaching, but when he returned, the rear window was fogged from the inside, and a handprint, small, perfectly formed, was etched into the moisture. Only this time, it wasn't his daughter's. Over the next decade, 19 unexplained child disappearances occurred across Arizona, Nevada, and Southern California. In every case, a car, a short time window, a hot day. But the bodies were never found. The children were never seen again. Not in hospitals, not in trafficking reports. Just gone. And always the same detail: the heat. In 5 of the cases, parents reported feeling cold when they opened the car, despite the outside temperature being over 100 degrees. Not AC cold, airless cold. Like the cabin had been drained of heat, like something had absorbed it. One forensic technician called it thermal inversion. Said the seatbelt clasps were colder than the surrounding plastic. Said there was no scientific reason for it. Said it was like opening an unplugged freezer that's been sealed for days. Some victims were last seen in cars parked beneath street lamps. Structures with locked electrical panels. In 3 cases, the panels had been opened, wires tampered, not for theft, just rerouted. One technician traced the wire path in Flagstaff and found something chilling. Someone had created a crude thermal reroute, drawing current down into the pole and back up again through a grounding line that fed directly into the sidewalk beneath where the car had been parked. As if the killer had been trying to create a thermal event. Not fire, not shock, something else. Something that would alter the pressure inside the car for a moment. Enough to pull. The press never caught on, because each case seemed isolated. Because each parent sounded just a little too unsure, because no one wanted to admit something else might be happening. But when a retired power grid technician came forward in 2016, things changed. He'd seen it before, he said. Back in 2009, in Bakersfield, a local transformer had overloaded near a supermarket. The cameras had blacked out for exactly 6 seconds. A child was reported missing from a locked car during that window. The manager said it couldn't be related, but the technician remembered something else. When he checked the fuse box outside, the panel door was wide open. And inside, he found a single object, a car key, old, rusted, wrapped in wire, bent at the tip, like it had been jammed somewhere it didn't belong. He took it to police. They lost the report. But when he saw the story again in 2016, another child, another car, another sudden cold, he remembered, and he still had the key. When tested, it had a trace of potassium nitrate on it, normally used in matches, fireworks, but also, when compressed, a way to alter temperature pressure fast. And if wired into a circuit, it might not ignite. It might just change the climate for a few seconds, just long enough. They began calling him the Heat Latch Man, because the children weren't taken by force. They were lured, released, freed, pulled from their seats, not through the door, through something else, through whatever he built beneath the circuit, through whatever he learned to wire, not with his hands, but with heat. One parent described seeing a figure through the fogged rear glass. Not a face, just a silhouette, but it looked like it was bending forward. Not like someone crouched, but like someone folding, like collapsing inward, like condensing into the space between seat and seatbelt. She screamed, but by the time she opened the door, nothing. No killer was ever found. The case files remained unconnected, but in 2017, a man walked into a used car lot outside Las Vegas and tried to buy an old sedan, cash only. The dealer said the car wasn't for sale. It had been used in a recent disappearance. The man smiled, said, "I know." Then he left. He didn't come for the car. He came for what was still trapped in the vents. The next killer didn't take children. He took time. He walked through nursing homes, waited for someone to blink. And when their eyes opened again, the date on the calendar was wrong, and everyone they remembered had already died. He didn't hurt you. He didn't touch you. He didn't even take you away. He just rearranged the order of your days. And by the time you realized what he'd done, it was already too late. The first time someone noticed was in 1997 at a nursing home in Canton, Ohio. A patient named Arnold Burke, 83 years old, had been marked unresponsive during morning rounds. The nurse made note of his condition: soft breathing, shallow, not unusual for someone in hospice. When she returned 2 hours later, Arnold was sitting upright in bed, asking why the calendar said July. She told him it was July. He insisted it was May, that his daughter had just visited, that he'd just eaten lemon cake for his birthday. Staff checked the logs. No recent visitors, no cake ordered. He pointed to the clock, said it was wrong, said the hands had been backward when he woke up, said the calendar had flipped itself while he was asleep. It sounded like confusion, normal for someone in late-stage decline, except that it happened again and again. 3 more residents over the next 2 months woke up believing they were in the wrong month. The same symptom, belief that 2 or more months had passed between sleep and waking. Memory fragments didn't match chart records. One woman kept insisting her sister had died, but the sister was still alive. Another man believed his own funeral had already happened. "I was in the box," he whispered. "I felt the cloth." Nurses chalked it up to a grief loop, trauma. But then a night nurse named Rachel put it together. The dates didn't match the reports, not on paper, on the wall. The calendar in the long hallway always hung straight, always updated at the start of the month. But she'd started seeing it off by a day, then 3, then a week. Not once, 4 times. Each time, someone was asleep when it happened. Each time, someone woke up disoriented. One night she stayed late, slept in the staff lounge, woke up at 3:42 a.m. to the sound of pages flipping. She swore it wasn't a dream. Said she walked into the hallway and saw a man standing at the far end, just outside the light. Not a resident, too tall, too still, not facing her, just touching the edge of the calendar. One finger at the top, turning a page. Then he was gone. Not disappeared, just not there anymore, like the thought of him had exited before her eyes could catch up. She told her supervisor. He dismissed her. A week later, she quit. In 2002, the facility changed ownership. But the deaths continued. Not unnatural, not violent, but always marked by a strange pattern. Patients would lose orientation to time rapidly in the 48 hours before death. Not just forgetfulness, total rewrites of the past. One woman insisted she was 22 again. Another believed she was pregnant with her 3rd child, a daughter she had never had. Nurses began referring to it as timeline drift. One aide left a note in a patient's file. Seems to be forgetting real sequence. Memories stitched out of order. But when the facility transitioned to digital records in 2007, they noticed something else. The building's Wi-Fi access logs showed activity between 3:40 and 3:50 a.m. in wings where no computers were in use. Every night, 10-minute intervals, no devices registered. But someone, or something, was triggering the signal. IT reviewed it, said it was probably interference. One tech ran a diagnostic. He tracked the signal bounce to a strange source, the hallway intercom. It was supposed to be analog, but it had been modified. Behind the panel, they found a Bluetooth relay, not commercial grade, handmade, wired into the paging system, but set not to broadcast, to receive, to listen. The timestamp on the soldering compound used to install it matched batch numbers sold in 2001, meaning it had been there for years. And that's when staff began reporting him again. The man, in the hallway, just outside the light. Never speaking. Only flipping the page. The door alarms never triggered. The cameras never caught him, but the calendar was always wrong the next morning. Not just flipped, sometimes rewritten. One aide found the numbers had been crossed out and redrawn. In pen. But no one had pens in that hallway. Not even the staff. Pens weren't allowed due to incidents of residents accidentally swallowing parts. One evening, a nurse turned the calendar to the correct page, took a photo, and went home. She came back the next day and found it turned again. The photo was still on her phone, time-stamped, but the current calendar page was missing entirely, torn out. Only the page for next month remained. It had only one word scribbled on it in ink: returned. The nurse left the job the next day. In 2010, a resident was found unresponsive in their bed. On the whiteboard above her head, someone had written February in large capital letters, even though it was October. The marker had no fingerprints. The message was written backward. They called the coroner. He couldn't find cause of death. But he noted something strange. Her body temp was 14 degrees lower than normal, as if she had been cold for a long time, longer than she should have been. When the funeral home picked up the body, the driver dropped the paperwork in the hallway. When he bent to pick it up, he swore he heard someone sigh. Not exhale, sigh. The kind you hear when someone's been waiting and is tired of waiting. The facility was shuttered in 2011 after an unrelated inspection, but the final night staff on record, the man who turned out the lights, said something strange on his exit interview. He paused, then said, "I never touched the calendar." The next killer didn't turn pages. He never marked time. He only drew one thing, the same face, over and over and over again, until the paper ran out, and then he drew it on walls. He didn't write. He didn't speak. He didn't sign anything. He only drew, and always the same face. It wasn't famous. It wasn't modeled after anyone recognized. It wasn't beautiful, grotesque, or detailed, but it was precise. The head was slightly tilted, the eyes too wide. The mouth always closed with a faint line above the lip, like a scar or a breath held too long. The eyebrows angled, not in worry or anger, but something else, like surprise, except softer. He always used the same medium, black ink, not pen, not marker, always ink. Sometimes poured from a bottle, sometimes dragged from something else. And he didn't do this in sketchbooks or galleries. He did it in the margins of death, in back rooms, in abandoned apartments, on the walls of motels that were scheduled to be demolished, on the ceilings of condemned hospitals, beneath bridges, inside the door panels of stolen cars. His drawings were always found after someone died, not beside the body, but nearby. In places you wouldn't check first: a crawl space, the back of a ceiling tile, a folded piece of notebook paper left under a detached vent. The first image was found in 2011 in Columbus, Ohio, behind the fuse box of a burned-out townhouse. A 19-year-old squatter had died in the fire, which investigators believed was caused by faulty wiring. When cleanup crews dismantled the paneling, they found a strip of drywall untouched by smoke, sealed behind the frame. On it, the face, ink on plaster. The paper had no heat damage. It had been hidden long before the fire. The brush strokes were clean, smooth, perfect. Forensics ruled it irrelevant, said it was vandalism from a previous tenant. Except a neighbor recognized the face. She said it looked like the same man she saw across the street the day of the fire. Watching from the bus stop. Not staring, not reacting, just still. They dismissed her as confused. 2 years later, in Michigan, a janitor found a similar drawing on the underside of a table in a shut-down school building. The paper had been pinned under the wood with a single nail. On it, the same face, same slant, same dead stare. A week later, a group of urban explorers entered the building to film a YouTube video. One of them fell through a second-story floor, dead on impact. The image was found again in their footage, painted on a wall in the background, barely visible behind falling insulation. When stills were pulled, it became clear it wasn't just painted once. It had been painted over, dozens of times, layered, faces upon faces, same features, same shape, slightly offset. Like the artist had drawn the same person again and again, unable to get it quite right. By 2015, more drawings appeared, not all connected by murder, but always connected by proximity to sudden, unexplained death. A man found drowned in a locked motel bathroom, despite the tub being dry. A teenager who suffocated in the back of her own car while parked in a garage that hadn't run in weeks. A man found motionless in an elevator between floors. No wounds, no signs of panic. And nearby, always, the face. Not staring back at you. Always just beside your line of sight. At the corner of a frame, beneath a chair, behind a shelf. Sometimes only visible under blacklight. Sometimes only partially complete, as if the artist had been interrupted, but the proportions were always exact, and the ink always fresh. An independent investigator tracked 5 of the drawings and had them analyzed. The ink compound had a strange anomaly, a synthetic carbon base not found in any commercially available pen. He sent the results to a university chemistry lab. The email came back in a single line. Why is there bone in this? The carbon compound had traces of calcium, nitrogen, and phosphorus, the signature chemical breakdown of cremated human remains. The ink wasn't ink. It was ash, mixed, distilled, refined, not industrially, ritually. By now, the FBI had taken interest, not publicly, but internally. They called him the Sketcher, someone leaving behind copies of a single identity, but they couldn't identify the face. They ran facial recognition against driver's license databases, inmate records, missing persons. Nothing. No match. Not even close. And that's when one analyst found something that changed the entire tone of the file. She reversed the image, flipped it, mirrored the features, and scaled them by 80%. Then ran it against death records. And she got a hit. The face matched the autopsy sketch of a man who died in 1983, a drifter found in a shipping container in Chicago. Cause of death, unknown. No trauma, no drugs, just collapsed. When the sketch was redrawn by hand, it became identical to the sketcher's face. Same tilt, same features, same faint scar. The body was unclaimed, buried in a city plot. But the investigator tried to find the container he died in to see if there had been markings. The container had long since been sold for scrap. But its final location? A rural plot in Indiana, just outside a private junkyard. And in 2016, a cleanup crew at that junkyard found a notebook buried beneath a stack of tires, water damaged, almost blank. But on the final page, one line, "Keep drawing it until they see it too." The next face wasn't drawn in ink, it was drawn in blood, on a ceiling. And by the time investigators looked up, they realized it wasn't the victims. It was the killers. The ceiling wasn't stained from the struggle. There had been none. The victim had been sitting in a chair, fully clothed, upright, dead, yes, but perfectly still. Not collapsed, not twisted, not even pale. Just seated, like someone waiting for a photograph to be taken. The blood wasn't his. That's what confused the ME, because the drawing above him, the one on the ceiling, was fresh, dripping. But every test confirmed that the blood belonged to someone else entirely. Male, type AB negative. No match in any criminal or civilian database. The drops had no trail, no splatter. It was like the blood had been lifted and placed upward from nowhere. And the face again, was flawless. Drawn upside down in long, elegant lines, the features slightly elongated due to the curvature of the ceiling, but unmistakable. The same scar above the mouth, the same wide, passive stare, the same closed lips like someone who'd almost spoken. One of the responding officers swore that the eyes weren't inked like the rest, that they shimmered, that they reflected light wrong, that when you looked up from a certain angle, they looked wet. He couldn't explain it. But after the autopsy was ruled inconclusive, the department quietly flagged the case and never released the crime scene photos to the press. In the months that followed, 4 more drawings appeared, not in homes, not in shelters or ruins, but in places that should have been clean. One was found in the staff stairwell of a university hospital in Pittsburgh, beneath the fire hose panel. Another in the fold-out bed of a disaster relief shelter, discovered only when a volunteer cut her leg on the broken frame and reached underneath for her dropped gauze. The third was on the interior panel of a Greyhound bus lavatory, removed during a random maintenance check when a handle jammed and revealed a false panel. All drawn the same way, all precise, none smeared, and each one reported by someone just hours before they were found dead. One man called his brother from the bus and said, "There's someone back here drawing in the dark." He was found 4 hours later, heart stopped. No injuries, no sign of stress. The drawing was hidden behind the toilet paper dispenser. The last message he left on his brother's voicemail was a whisper, "I think I've seen him before." The FBI's internal task force finally assembled everything they had: the notebooks, the ink analysis, the matched face, the historical victim from 1983. One profiler posed a terrifying theory, that the man from the shipping container hadn't been a victim at all, that he had been the original. The face was his, and he had died trying to stop what came next, that the drawings were part of a preservation, not of identity, but of presence, that each face redrawn wasn't a message, it was a marker, like a tag left behind, allowing something to return to that location, or stay inside it, or worse, live behind it. One special agent visited the plot where the 1983 victim had been buried. Unmarked grave. When they dug it up, the coffin was empty, not deteriorated. Empty. Clean wood, no remains, no trace. That same night, a maintenance worker at a rest stop 30 miles away found a page of printer paper folded under a vending machine. On it, the face, drawn in blood, dry. but the outline looked warped, as if someone had tried to erase it but couldn't. Only the eyes were untouched, still perfect, still staring. The blood didn't match anyone in the area. Again. Then came the worst part. An archivist reviewing cold files from the early 2000s came across an autopsy photo mislabeled in the system. She opened it and froze. The corpse on the table wasn't the same victim listed on the report. The nose was off. The lips slightly parted. The scar above the mouth clearly visible. The date on the file? April 4th, 2004. The same day, another drawing was found in a children's library on the underside of a reading table, drawn in blue ink on an old checkout card. And the label on the autopsy drawer? Drawer 44. One agent started tracking every instance of the number 44 in the drawings. It was always there, not in the face itself. In the background, scribbled into shadows, on the corner of the page. In one version found beneath a church pew, it was tucked into the curvature of the ear. In another, it was carved into the tear duct. Always hidden, but always exactly 44. Never 45, never 43. As if that number mattered, as if it was counting down. Or worse, marking how many had been drawn so far. It wasn't about the face, not really. The face was just the surface. The real terror began when they started cataloging the drawings, when they lined them up, all 44 confirmed, one after the other, in high-resolution digital scan. And what they discovered sent the entire task force into silence. The expressions changed, not wildly, not like a flipbook, but subtly, sequentially. In the first drawing, found behind that fuse box in Ohio, the face was nearly blank. Peaceful, maybe, the mouth a flat line, eyes wide, empty. By the 5th image, the brow had lowered slightly. By the 11th, the lips had begun to press together more tightly. At 22, the left eye had begun to shift. Not looking straight ahead anymore, just a hair off center, as if focusing on someone outside the frame. At 36, a single vertical line appeared above the right brow. Stress, intention, awareness. By 44, the image wasn't blank anymore. It was watching, not you, past you, through you. The eyes weren't passive, they were reading. The corners of the lips had tightened, not into a smile, not into a frown, into something else. The look people give just before they speak, when the words already exist and the breath is still trapped behind the teeth. The face had evolved, across years, across states, across deaths. And the change was not just artistic, it was progression. One digital forensics agent proposed the unthinkable. What if the artist wasn't drawing the same face repeatedly? What if he was drawing one face, aging in real time, image by image, through death after death, location after location, as if this being was continuing to develop with each person it passed near? What if each drawing wasn't static? What if it was a snapshot of something becoming more real, more formed, more awake? What if the killer wasn't leaving drawings? What if the killer was the drawing? It made a sort of terrible sense, because the paper was always found after the death, never before. No one had ever caught him in the act of drawing. No cameras ever picked him up. No footage, not once. Only the image remained. Always fresh, never signed, never aged, but it aged. The face shifted, the eyes deepened, the hairline thickened, the shadow beneath the mouth darkened from light gray to black, and at drawing 44 you could almost see teeth. That was when the prints began disappearing. From evidence lockers, from physical files, from hard drives, one after another. The drawings, all digital copies, began corrupting themselves. Pixelation at first, then horizontal tears, then file format errors. then complete erasure. And it wasn't accidental. A technician pulled one original from an air-gapped cold drive to preserve it. ATIF scan from 2013. He left the room, came back. The drive was still spinning, but the file name had changed, not deleted, renamed. A string of characters. 440, 340, 240, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, 140, Yadnaştırısıt. 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 It was counting backward. He unplugged the drive and found his office lights dimmed, all but one bulb, the one directly above his desk. When the janitor came in hours later, he found the technician seated at his chair, breathing, still, but frozen, in his hand, a pen. On the desk, a post-it note, not his handwriting. The note simply read, "It needs 45. Since then, no new drawing has been recovered, but the face is still seen. One paramedic claimed to see it reflected in a microwave door as he attempted to revive a stroke patient. A nurse in Denver reported seeing it flicker in the sheen of an IV bag. One detective reviewing a blurred photo swore that when he sharpened the contrast, he could see the face behind the curtain in the background. Then, it was gone. What happens when the 45th drawing appears? No one knows. No one wants to. But if you ever find a piece of paper folded under a radiator or behind a mirror or taped to the underside of your car seat, and the ink is fresh, don't look at the face, because if it recognizes you, you might be the 45th, and that's the one it's been waiting for. They never made headlines, never ended up on trial. No mugshots, no confessions, just footprints in silence, names lost in paperwork, and faces no one could forget once they saw them. These weren't monsters from stories. They were real. They walked your streets, lived in your blueprints, waited inside your calendars, behind your mirrors, inside your walls. And if you're still thinking about them tonight, maybe that means they've already drawn you. Stay awake, stay safe, and don't answer the knock.